Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to look at the importance of relevant information and the calculation of the indifference point. Again, you have this problem provided to you, and what we're going to do is we're going to start with part A, and I'm only going to really work on part A because it's the more challenging part of this question. So let's take a look at the question. Let's take a look at how we solve the indifference point, what the indifference point is, and the importance of analyzing relevant information. What information is relevant, what information is not relevant in calculating our solution. Let's take a look at it. So we have a situation here where a vendor has offered to supply our motors at $16 a motor. And we're wondering, should we do that? Or should we continue to make our motors ourselves? And what we're going to do is the first part of the question is asking you, what is the indifference point? The indifference point is basically the volume where making the motors ourselves or buying the motors makes no difference from a financial perspective. It equals each other. And the key word there is equal. That's what the indifference point is. That option 1 or option 2, they're equal to each other. So when we're solving this, recognize that it's the equal sign is our starting point. So in our first situation here, we have an opportunity to have someone make the motors for us. And we can buy these motors at $16 a motor. So 16x is what we would pay to buy these motors. What we have to do over here is we have to figure out our cost of making these motors ourselves. And we need to figure out that equation. And once we figure that out, and we have it equal to the buy, we can solve for our indifference point. And the indifference point, again, is when these equal each other. So what volume, what x, makes it so that the cost of making equals buying? And we're looking purely here at the quantitative side, the numerical side. There's certainly a lot of qualitative factors to consider. But understanding the quantitative is a really good starting point. So let's go over to this schedule here, and let's focus now on our costs of making the product. So we're told that we're going to have these types of variable costs. So that's our starting point. How do we analyze our variable costs? Well, we're told that our direct materials are going to cost $95,000. And we are producing a volume of 20,000 units. So therefore, our direct material cost is $4.75. Now, let's focus on our direct labor. Our direct labor is $85,000. 85,000 divided by 20,000 units, our direct labor cost is 4.25. How about our variable overhead? Our variable overhead cost we estimate to be 75,000 over 20,000 units. That'll be equal to $3.75. So when we put it all together, our variable overhead costs and labor costs and materials, overall, our variable costs will equal $12.75 per unit. So when we introduce that over here to the equation, you're going to see that it comes out to $12.75 per unit. Now, what we also have to focus on is that we're going to have costs that are fixed that we have to consider as well. It's not just going to be the variable costs when we are looking at making a product. So when we go through our notes in the question, we have to analyze this information based on relevancy. It's the concept of relevant information. So let's look at our fixed overhead. Let's look at our 3 items in here and determine whether or not we should include that in our equation here. Our first one, amortization on equipment. Let's think about amortization. Let's think about depreciation. Is that a cash item? No, it's not. It's a sunk cost. And the equipment itself has no alternative use, no market value, so really it's worthless in a lot of ways. So would we need to include this? The answer is no. With management accounting, remember, we're looking future directed, oriented. And that's our direction. We're looking towards the future. And we're looking towards how our cash is going to leave the company in the future. So we've already paid for the equipment. Depreciation, amortization are non-cash items. So therefore, this is a sunk cost and is irrelevant in our calculation. Property taxes. Let's take a look now at the property taxes. The space occupied by the motor production activities will remain idle if STJ purchases rather than makes the motors. So the interesting thing here is that we're going to have to pay the property taxes regardless of whether we make the product or whether we buy it. So we can actually add the $15,000 into both of these, or we can just ignore the $15,000 because it's going to be there in both scenarios. So again, that makes that irrelevant information. So let's discuss this a little bit more, a little further. Our first one was with regard to our amortization or depreciation. That is a non-cash item. The value of the equipment has no future value. So therefore, that makes it irrelevant. We're going to have another cost, which is our property taxes. That's there in both scenarios. So again, that makes that cost irrelevant in determining our difference point because they equal each other. Now let's move on to the last one, factory supervision. This is the salary of a production supervisor who oversees motor production. Now, the individual would no longer be required if motor production ceased. What you can see here is we don't need the supervisor here. We do need the supervisor here. Here's a hint. One is a yes, one is a no. There is a difference between the two, between making and buying. So when you see the difference there, that is a key to understanding relevant information. So we're going to have to include the $45,000 there as a cost of making the motors ourselves. Again, yes and no. Therefore, that makes it relevant. So when we now solve our x, our indifference point, and this is just using pretty simple algebra, x will equal 13,847 motors. That means that purely on a quantitative reason, this is the volume where we're indifferent. Now I'll have a question for you, and I'll let you solve this one yourself. If we're going to have motors that are going to be greater than this number, should we make it or buy it? Do a little bit of a test and see what your answer is. Anyways, thank you.